I think I should just come right out with it to set the tone. I'm not a fan of The Last of Us. Now, hold on. I worry what many of you just heard is, I hate The Last of Us, which is not what I said. Like Pagan Min, I'm very particular with my words. I wouldn't even say I dislike the games, and I can certainly appreciate the many things it does right. I'll freely admit what it does well. However, the way I've seen many people talk about this game, you would think it's some long-promised savior. Like the Messiah come down from the mountaintop to usher in a long-awaited golden age of games as art. And I'm not one of those people. I looked at the game, I watched the playthroughs, I gave it a little salute, and then I went back to my up-teenth playthrough of the Mass Effect trilogy. But of course, the story doesn't end there, does it? About 7 years later from the first game, a sequel was released to an unsuspecting world in the middle of a pandemic. So many years after that, there was a television adaptation of the first game on the mostly reliable home box office. And that finally brings us to the present, as there has been a second season of that show, naturally covering the second game, officially making the property a multimedia franchise and a little bit of a big deal. And now here comes little me like a cookie-cutter shark to get my ounce of flesh from this behemoth. But of course, we must set the stage for the benefit of myself and all of you. The Last of Us is set in a classic style of zombie apocalypse. After all, it was released in 2013, an age where the undead had infected pop culture from top to bottom. The game's narrative is primarily character-focused as we follow our friend Joel as he navigates first present and later far post-apocalypse. In the pre-apocalypse, Joel had a daughter named Sarah. However, since she is quite clearly not the girl on the box, I would hesitate to form any attachments. And indeed, the kid couldn't even last 2 hours into the end of the world before receiving an unwelcome lead implant to the gut. So, the stage is set, the world is brutal, and our man Joel has good reason to be overwhelmingly grim for most of the rest of the time we'll be spending with him. The other person who will be spending a lot of time with Joel is secondary protagonist Ellie. Her deal is that she is immune to the zombie virus, which in this incarnation is kind of a nightmarish fungus that takes over your brain. So we have our plot. Joel is the hard-as-nails survivalist who must escort immune girl Ellie to the place where she can be put to good use. It's a bare-bones plot, which is appropriate since no one is here for that, and it's the character work that is the true meat of the narrative. The pair are set up together as little better than victims of circumstance. Ellie can't leave Joel unless she would like to suffer any number of gruesome deaths, and Joel is stuck with Ellie from point to point as one lead and then another and another go dead. In the beginning, the pair are allies at best. Joel treats Ellie's bratty sass and backtalk with nothing short of dull contempt. Like she's some snarky squeeze toy and he's just gritting his teeth until the batteries run out. However, after months on the road and relying on pretty much no one but each other, the two begin to develop a relationship that goes beyond just work. Sort of a traveling buddy boot camp, where the two people have the choice of either becoming friends or murder. Thankfully in this case it was the former. And Ellie's smart-ass demeanor begins to shift more towards curiosity about life before the outbreak, which Joel is willing to answer. Later the questions will shift into ones more pointed towards Joel as a person, creating an appreciable contrast as he starts to answer them when in the beginning he would have been perfectly content with the silent treatment. All of this is good and worth replicating. Characters go through arcs and relationships develop, makes an audience, aka me, stay invested and keep from getting bored as things change and are thus constantly refreshed. It means nothing to me if two characters start out as friends and then remain so throughout the narrative, never being tested or developing. I need to see them being awkward with each other, or better yet, complete bastards. That way I feel rewarded for going on this story's journey because it actually feels like a journey. As I began this video by saying, I have no reservations about pointing out what this story does correctly. That being said, I do have issues that keep me from breaking out the knee pads like everyone else. For one, the story isn't nearly as novel as it and the community seem to think it is. It's true that you should never award points for originality, because nothing is, and I just got done talking about the good dynamics, but at the same time, you can almost predict the whole story with nothing but the cover art and the clip of Joel's daughter being murdered. It's the gruff individual learning to love again, with bonus points if it's a man and bonus points again if he's old. This story and the movie Up are exactly the same outline. A nice and ordinary man loses a female loved one, becoming jaded with the passage of time. He is united with a lively child whom he initially views as nothing but a burden. The pair are essentially trapped together for an extended journey. The child proves themselves useful, thus earning the older man's respect. Emotional vulnerability is shared, thus strengthening their bond even further. And in the end, the older man will put himself at great risk to rescue the child, symbolically correcting the past in the process. But The Last of Us does not have a flying house. Sure, originality is overrated and you can draw parallels between most stories. It's only when people start to praise this story as God's gift to gamers that I feel the need to come along and pop all their balloons. But maybe I'm just overly analytical and that compromised my fun. However, what did even more to break my fun was the story's near fetish for being as bleak as possible. Nothing wrong with a bit of grim darkness, you understand. Even better if it's in a far future where there is only war. Dramatic stakes and somber moments are vital to an audience's catharsis when something appropriately tragic happens. It's one of the main reasons that everyone absolutely hates quips and Marvel humor, because they never allow you to process your emotions. Like the laugh break after a joke, this is the crying break after our favorite romantic couple got torn apart by cruel circumstances. Which is ruined if you try to add in any sort of comedy. A lot of the time, you don't want to break the tension, as it is what lets an audience catch their breath or emotionally reset. But to my mind, this bleak drama has always been a balancing act with diminishing returns. Speaking for myself, as soon as I know a story's going to have an unrelentingly hopeless narrative, my guard goes up. Don't get too invested in anyone or anything because this writer is dead set on giving everyone the worst possible outcome. And that's why I can't decide if murdering the little girl at the beginning was a good choice to set the tone, or a bad choice to tip their hand. While it's true that there are some moments of levity to break up the sorry state of the world, they're too brief and infrequent to make us forget that everything is awful no matter where you go. Put it to you another way, you need to take time to build a nice house before it means anything for it to get burned to the ground. And if it keeps getting burned to the ground over and over, I'm gonna keep my distance because it looks like God might have it in for you. About the only time The Last of Us came close to building something that might seem it could endure is in the addition of secondary characters Sam and Henry. But even then it was spotty and didn't last long enough for me to relax. But of course, we can't talk about depression in The Last of Us without touching on the most foundational part of the story. And I think I've put in an appropriately long middle bit here. Let's get into the ending. After an entire year traveling across the greater portion of the continental United States, Joel and Ellie are finally vindicated when they reach the research hospital/resistance outpost where Ellie's immunity can be put to good use. However, the catch is that the process to extract the source of the immunity will kill her, a sacrifice that Joel is not willing to make. And in the process of being forcefully ejected from the hospital, the man turns the tables and goes a bit, shall we say, postal. It's a real take no prisoners sequence. Now, let's not make two ways about this. This is a horrific decision made for selfish reasons. Joel is robbing humanity of a cure, stopping what would have been a historic moment in finally getting rid of the zombies. It's the ultimate form of the phrase, "fuck you, got mine." However, I, and everyone I've ever seen play the game, well, at least everyone that isn't grandstanding, but all of us immediately side with Joel in his actions to all but burn down the hospital and save his adoptive daughter. And why? Well, I forget the reviewer or essayist who said this, which is always a recipe for disaster, but someone once compared Joel to Scarlett O'Hara, the protagonist from Gone with the Wind. Particularly the scene where she returns home to find her family's plantation has been left in ruins. And in my opinion, whoever made that comparison hit the nail square on the head. Joel has spent the last 2 decades in the ruins, starved of love or emotional connection, and now that he has found it again, with God as his witness, he will never go hungry again. A sentiment that maintains a sort of dark relatability as each year passes in our real world and everyone becomes more distrustful of everyone else. So if any of us found that connection in any given form, would we give it up for the benefit of a load of people we have never and will never meet? I know I wouldn't, but then again I am a psychopath. Ultimately, it's the same dilemma that happens every day, the intellectual versus the emotional sides of your brain fighting against each other. The intellectual side makes the longer argument with better points, but ultimately you know it's the emotional side that's truly looking out for you. The intellectual says, don't murder everyone in this hospital because it's not what Ellie would want, and it will have long-term ramifications that could lead to the doom of humanity, or even yourself, so let's just leave it be. However, it is impossible to hear all of that over the emotional side of your brain going, do what you gotta do. It's this ending that ties up The Last of Us in a, ultimately, neat bow. And it's why I'll never begrudge anyone who calls themselves a fan of this series, and continually listen to their essays on the matter. Though I worry they might not extend me the same goodwill as I approach all their hype balloons with my comically oversized sewing needle. However, now the game has made the transition from the PlayStation to the streaming service in this HBO adaptation. Now, it's no secret that video game adaptations for the screen in any aspect have always been a shit show, to put it mildly. The ratio is about 200 failures for about 0 successes. And the sad part is that's not hyperbole. Now, this has been changing in recent years, sort of, and by little bits, and luckily The Last of Us is a very easy property to translate onto the screen. Still, there are always going to be additions, subtractions, and translations in order to fit a designated time slot, make elements practical to film, and replace gameplay with further narrative. So, how do these entities compare to each other? Overall, I would say the two are about the same quality, with the show doing some things better and some things worse. On the worse end, I did not appreciate the additional screen time given to secondary antagonist David and his little community. While initially framed as inoffensive or potential allies, it soon revealed that a few people, or just one in the TV show, that Joel had killed earlier in the story were part of their group. But that uncertainty is ruined by showing them early in the episode. And I don't really care about their hardships because they're cannibals. They're murderers. They attack Joel and Ellie first in both renditions, and their main leader David is heavily implied to have some Epstein-like tendencies. Other people are going through the same hardships in the apocalypse, but they don't resort to all of that. I could beat them all to death with a clown hammer, including the children, and my pulse would never rise above 85. So that didn't work for me. Also, there's a moment in both game and show where Joel has a surprising reunion with Ellie. In the game, he finds her mid-rampage on David's head with a machete, so it makes sense she wouldn't hear him coming. Whereas in the show, he sneaks up and grabs her without saying a word. It's very clunky and it bothers me. However, the show did address my biggest complaint, which is the game's one and only DLC, Left Behind. It's framed as Ellie taking care of Joel after a life-threatening injury, intercut with a flashback to her spending an enjoyable day that turned tragic with her best friend Riley. The issue is that anyone who's completed the base game at this point has already seen Joel recover, and Ellie told the story of this flashback at the end of the game, making it wholly redundant as post-game content, and certainly not worth the extra 15 buckarooskies that were originally asked for on top of the main game. But as the show does it, cutting open the narrative to reinsert this at its proper point in the narrative just after Joel's injury, that works much better. Joel's just been injured and now he needs to recover, and we can intercut that with more information about Ellie via the flashback as she's treating him. Also doesn't take away from her explaining the flashback to Joel at the end as she reveals what happened after the fact, all making it flow much better. Side note, there are two more little things that are complete nitpicks, but I want to say them. First is that this room is fucking massive for an orphan at a military school in the post-apocalypse. I would have expected rows of bunk beds. Second, and this is more of a criticism of zombie fiction as a whole, but I don't know when I'll get to point it out again, I don't like when people get bit and then are surprised that they got bit. Enough force to drive teeth through the skin, you would know. It'd be the equivalent of having a dozen nails driven through your forearm. So the show has a steady number of pros and cons to balance out with the game. On the cons side, the show is way less subtle in trying to make people understand that Joel's actions at the end are bad. Kind of steamrolling audience interpretation. On the pros, the expanded role and relationship of Henry and his brother Sam was quite welcome. So they did pretty well. I will say I prefer game Joel to show Joel. Not really a criticism, but personal preference. Show Joel, as portrayed by Pedro Pascal, is much more of a quiet type. More the sort to keep his head down and do what he has to do to make it through the day. And while the game Joel was also a man of few words, he was also never more than 5 seconds away from caving in someone's head with a brick. I appreciate that because it creates a starker contrast with the nicer, quieter moments and syncs up better with the ending. But I can see how some might prefer the emotional loner type that Pedro and the showrunners went for instead, so no mark against them. However, believe it or not, this has all been the preamble to the real reason I wanted to make this video. When The Last of Us Part 2 came out, it sort of became the Last Jedi of video games, with a bold contrast between the people who liked the game and those who despised its very existence, with most people seeming to fall into the latter of those two options. And this is where my interest in everything was sparked. I knew about the first game already, it was impossible to avoid for anyone in the gaming sphere, but like I said, not a fan. I was content to leave the deep dissections of the game to other people. But with the arrival of this second game and the controversy that followed, I was interested. Back in the day, I even wrote a script with the intention of turning it into a video, a full 4 years before I would actually start making videos. And while I'm regretful that I didn't start YouTube sooner so I could have that many more years of experience behind me, I'm also kind of glad that I didn't. I still had that old script lying around, so I reread it in preparation for this. It is excessively long and not very good. But in defense of past me, it was mid-2020. We were all bored and going mildly insane. Also, while it could be guessed that I was in the camp of the detractors, my opinion on the game has definitely softened over time. Though that doesn't mean that I like it. And now, as that second part of the story returns, sort of breathing a second life into the controversy, so do I. To pay tribute to a terrible thing I almost made, except for lacking decent editing software and a self-consciousness over the sound of my own voice. Also, because while a good thing is worth discussing, a good thing that turns bad has much more mileage. But here I am, alluding to Part 2's low quality without actually telling you anything. So let me begin at the beginning. Set almost half a decade after the first game, things pick up with Joel and Ellie living life at a peaceful settlement in rural Wyoming. They had a few pleasant years together as surrogate father and daughter, but that all fell apart when Ellie finally pieced together what Joel did at the end of the first game. Because yeah, I would expect the massacre of well over a dozen people might put a bit of a dampener on your family life. However, that isn't the only consequence Joel has to take for his rampage, as the survivors of that group track him down, with their leader, or main driving force behind the hunt for Joel, being this woman named Abby. It was her father that was going to do the surgery to transfer Ellie's cure, right up until Joel stabbed him in the neck. So Abby's a touch unhappy about that, but perfectly fine to let bygones be bygones just so long as Joel helps her work on her golf swing. This more or less functions as the inciting incident of the plot, leading Ellie, her love interest Dina, and a few others to travel to Seattle to revenge the revenge. Alternating briefly before and a long time after are sequences following Abby, getting to see her side of the story very literally, setting up a sort of both sides of the plot for Ellie and Abby on which the story can build its narrative of revenge. So if the first game was Up, the second one is Old Boy, but much less competently put together. There's almost a Rorschach test going on here, as each person I've seen comes away with their own unique set of complaints. One I see quite often is the group quite annoyed that Joel let Abby get the better of him. By all appearances, Joel has more street smarts than an entire bus full of civil engineers. Yet he seems perfectly calm to enter a room where he is outnumbered by strangers. That's a fair enough gripe, or else I wouldn't bother bringing it up. But for my money, there are really only two major issues that completely ruin the story. First is one I believe that even fans of the game will agree with me. It is that the structuring of the plot is garbage. The stuff I just told you about Abby's dad and her whole motivation to use Joel like a fairway, all of that backstory and motivation is not revealed until halfway through the story. Otherwise, Abby shows up, murders the protagonist of the first game, then disappears again, which could be quite jarring for people who didn't see that coming. However, what is worse than that is that characters are established with personalities and struggles several hours after we've already seen them die. I don't really think I need to explain what the problem is there. Earlier I talked about putting up my guard and trying to avoid getting invested when things are destined to be bleak. Well, I'm definitely not going to get invested in the problems of this guy Owen after my second interaction with the character was him getting shot in the chest. And it must be said that the story of the game has an unhealthy reliance on flashbacks. I tried to count them up in my head, and I believe there are 8 or 9 of them throughout the story. I think I'm well within my rights to say, that's too many flashbacks! It's frankly inexcusable because if the game had just been told in order, it would have been a lot better, at least in my opinion. But instead, it cuts all over the place and collapses in on itself, leaving it very jumbled. Which, a jumbled mess is a good bridge to my other, bigger problem, the ending. Whereas the ending of The Last of Us 1 was what wrapped up the tale of the story in a neat little box, the ending of The Last of Us Part 2 is what leaves it buried in a shallow grave. What happens is that after what feels like a climactic showdown between Abby and Ellie, which Ellie loses, badly, the endgame begins on a farm where Ellie and Dina are leading the quiet life. However, Ellie is still haunted by the past, so sets off once again to begin her path for vengeance anew, creating my first issue with the third act. By the end of the game, Ellie is completely unlikable. At 2 points throughout the narrative, Ellie commits very unhinged acts as part of her revenge quest, after both of which she acts pretty shaken up, for about several seconds, But then after that, she's feeling good and ready to keep up the mission, damn the expense. Even after Abby beats her ass, kills one of her friends, and nearly kills Dina, Ellie still thinks, yeah, I could give this a go for one more try. So is the path of revenge tearing her up physically and mentally, or is she ready to kill anyone and everyone who gets in her way? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't be emotionally numb and having tender moments on the couch. Though I think emotionally numb was the intended direction, as by the end, Ellie has little to no regard for her love interest, Dina. Honestly, Dina is such a disappointing character to me. After what could have been a good start to the character in the opening act, the plot basically chucks her to one side for the whole of Act 2. The most she gets up to is monitoring radio chatter from their camp and tending to Ellie's wounds. Basic functional actions. But just focusing on the ending, Dina actively pleads for Ellie not to go on this revenge quest and potentially get herself killed. However, neither Ellie nor the plot respect Dina's agency as a character, so both tell her to go pound sand. Ellie is a psychopath. And don't get me wrong, Joel was definitely showing his murderous urges in the end of the first game's story. However, Joel goes on his rampage because of someone he loves. Ellie goes on her rampage in spite of the people she loves, making me question if she loves them at all. Many people will argue that was the point, to make Ellie the big bad, and I believe that's fair. There's a lot of valuable real estate to find in a good bad guy. There are any number of villains I could mention who have become more popular than the heroes of their story because of their strong characterization. However, my issue stems from the fact that Ellie makes for a rather one-dimensional villain. Her entire life has become, I want to kill Abby. I may have moments of doubt, but I want to kill Abby. I may get sidetracked, but I want to kill Abby. I may care for Dina, but as the ending has shown us, that is secondary to me at best because, wait for it, I want to kill Abby. I have no question in my head how this character is going to behave or what they're going to do, and so I have no investment. Honestly, by the end, or even 2/3 through the game, I liked Abby quite a bit more. Yeah, she also had a stupid mission of revenge, but at least we got that out of the way early. We got to see how it didn't help her, and we got to see how her goals were more than just, I want to kill one person really, really, really badly. She had stuff to do and people she liked, which wasn't much, but it was something. I feel like it might have been the writer's intention to make me like Abby more than Ellie, but even if that was the case, I'm not giving them any credit. Because it's not me choosing freely to like one good character over another good character, it's me choosing to enjoy a character more than a one-note serial killer with no self-preservation instincts. So it was fair to say that Abby had redeemed herself in my eyes by the end of the game. However, apparently God thought differently as she's captured and tortured for several months. Which leads me into my other criticism. After spending an entire game setting up the conflict between the conventional and military Washington Liberation Front against the tribal and religious Seraphites, showing them both to be fully realized communities all on their own, there is a climactic battle between the two that is not the final conflict of the story. No, that is admittedly an intense sequence, but it's only at the end of the second act, which unfortunately leaves the story with no antagonist going into the endgame. So, in the back half of the third act, enter a whole new faction. A group of almost comically evil slavers. They are so underbaked I couldn't even tell you their name. I think it's the Reavers, but even if I'm wrong, I don't care enough to check. Ultimately, all they are is just a bunch of heavily armed and armored guilt-free meat puppets for Ellie to gun through on her way to Abby. It's very transparently trying to recreate the climactic feel of the first game without success. Because there it meant something, as Joel had to mow down the members of the group he'd basically spent the whole game trying to find. Here, it's just meaningless slavers who are only there to be an obstacle for Ellie and to beat up on Abby. Off screen, mind you. Their entire role in the narrative could have been replaced by two sticks. One stabs Abby, the other one stabs Ellie, and that way both women are injured for their climactic knife fight at low tide. Was it cool in the concept art? Kinda. Was it cool in the game? Not even a little. Because I don't care. I hate Ellie and I'm ready for Abby to get on with her life. My investment had bottomed out. So going into Season 2, I had a specific list of things I wanted to see. A very simple list to improve my opinion. Fix the structure. Don't characterize Ellie as a one-dimensional psycho. Throughout the story ideally, but at least in the ending. And don't introduce a new, meaningless villain faction in the third act, trying and failing to raise the stakes. So, did the show learn these lessons and make me happy? Well, let's find out, and I'll be taking these episode by episode, writing out everything after my first viewing, with some appropriate time afterwards for mental digestion and a few alterations to make everything fit together more smoothly. But for the most part, you'll be hearing it just as I viewed it. We begin at the beginning of episode 1, and immediately, right out of the gate, the show is already ahead of the game. Because scene 1 is Abby and her friends burying the dead following Joel's rampage through their base/hospital. Excellent. Very good change. Now we have instantly set up Abby and her group as the antagonist, while keeping them sympathetic. That is a lot of graves. So right away, everyone knows who they are, why they want to do what they're going to do, and now we have this built-in ticking clock counting down until they meet. As for the rest of the episode, I would rate it a resounding meh. It's not bad, or else I would have said as much, but it does suffer from a sort of looseness. I'll give you some examples of what I mean. The first is when Ellie and Dina go out on patrol with a few others and decide to raid an infected building by themselves for no real good reason. They're not cornered, they're not on a time limit, and they could just go back to their city and get more guys, as indeed the supporting characters in their group suggest. But no, they have to go in right now. One of those annoying moments when the main characters seem all too aware that they're the main characters. When in reality, one bite or even infected cut on Dina, and it's bedtime for Bonzo. Ellie too if someone sees it happen and doesn't believe that she's immune. Worked better in the game when the two were part of a duo sent out on patrol specifically to clear/monitor infected, rather than breaking away from their group to do an easy job in a difficult way. Then in the scene right after that, there's a moment where their sort of city council is having a meeting where leader Maria says she thinks a horde is coming. And when asked why she thinks this, she says,
I don't know, just lately I've had a feeling.
I'm sorry, what? I get that they're trying to set up a horde in the next episode, but you couldn't have given her a better reason than I feel it in my bones. They couldn't have given her something a little smarter than that? Like, we encountered 4 infected last month, 6 last week, and now we're up to 12 in the area. Or maybe, fungus doesn't do well in the cold, the infected could try to move towards warmer climates, and highway blah blah blah, which is only so many miles away from us, is the most direct path south. So you understand what I mean with these two examples when I say the scripting could have been tightened up. Not bad, exactly, but it feels very lacking. Otherwise, I shared a preference for murderous game Joel before, and that remains true, but there's a moment where show Joel is better as he gets to fix a breaker box. Nice for the character to show off other skills besides an aptitude for rampant second-degree murder. Also, there's a scene at the end where Ellie approaches Joel on his porch but walks right past him without speaking. Similar to, but apparently removing the most powerful scene in the game. Though, that's alright if that's the way they want to tell this story. We begin with episode 2, which played out largely how I expected. Flashback at the beginning, Joel's death as a cliffhanger at the end, and a lot of connective tissue in between. However, I expected to start with a flashback to Joel and Ellie, specifically their one great day at the Wyoming Museum. That wasn't the case, and instead it's more Abby, and it's more of a dream sequence to the time she found her father's corpse. Though I suspect they couldn't get the actor back because, though it's heavily talked about, we never actually see a body. Between the beginning and the end, for the most part, it's a lot of basic stuff. Nothing I'd call filler necessarily, but it's just functional connective tissue to move characters into position, with a couple of standout moments. I will say the imagery in this episode was something special. The clicker in the snow, Abby's narrow crawl through the collapsing fence, and of course the big battle to defend Jackson from a horde of infected. The battle does get a little sloppy in the second half with just a lot of stuff going on, loses momentum, but for that first half it manages quite well. Smart tactics to roll barrels of gasoline down these retractable ramps to make a wall of fire, shots of dozens of spent casings lying on the ground, all good stuff. Did better than the defense of Winterfell by a long way. But of course the big moment is Joel's death, which plays out more or less like it did in the game. Abby and Joel temporarily join up to escape the zombie horde, they make it back to her group, then Abby and Joel reenact the climax of Bioshock 1. Seriously, how have more people not made this comparison? I mean, it's not a 9-iron, but still, come on guys. I thought they might change this meeting, but it plays out more or less the same way it did in the game, though handled better in the show. Abby says her group can help defend Jackson, the fire from the town is distracting Joel, and the room they enter has about 4 people instead of about 8. Maybe it still bothers other people, but I'm not one of them. Instead, what bothers me is what happens next. Once her group has got Joel held at gunpoint, you know what Abby does?
He starts monologuing.
I mean, this has got to be full paragraphs it goes on so long. She just cannot leave any detail out. You were there. I know what you look like. There are no more fireflies. Because of you. You killed 18 soldiers. And 1 doctor. That doctor was my father. Yes, he knows. And I, as an audience member, know. Can we get on with it? I was actually going to use that clip from The Princess Bride, but the show actually has one built right in.
I have waited
Just shut the fuck up and do it already.
Definitely gave me a newfound appreciation for how the game did it. Step inside, I'm Joel, blam! It was quick, to the point, and, gore notwithstanding, it wasn't so excessive. But in this monologue, Abby has what I would almost describe as a sadistic glee to kill Joel. I don't know that I would call it out of character, but it definitely feels cheap. Like someone in the writer's room got worried they were making Abby too sympathetic, so they needed to remind the audience that she's the antagonist in the most ham-fisted way possible. Okay, Abby's the villain, so let's have her threaten to murder Dina, even though they just went through the trouble of sedating Dina, and it's just so Joel can tell Abby something she already knows. Oh, and when we shoot the scene, make sure to instruct the actress to stop just short of shaking with anticipation. Anyway, Ellie arrives on the scene just after Joel tells Abby that a man chooses and a slave obeys. She's unable to save him, but does get to watch as Abby plays the Crabbo and gives Joel the Stabbo. Good horrified wailing from Bella Ramsey here. Top-notch anguish. I've seen a fairly common criticism, and one I support to a degree, that they should have recast the principal characters because they look so very similar to the first season. It feels like a few weeks or months have passed instead of 4 years. But I can certainly see why they wanted to keep certain talent on set, so I give it a pass. Now we reach episode 3, which was a big pile of nothing. That perhaps comes off a little more mean than I intended, but there really is no better way to describe it. I will summarize the entire episode to you now. I want to go after Abby. Maybe we shouldn't go after Abby. I want to go after Abby. I don't want her going after Abby. I'm going after Abby. And that's the entire hour, save one sort of unnecessary cutaway to establish the Seraphites. There is very little to talk about here. Best I can provide is a few more issues. The biggest one of them being that I didn't need 3 separate scenes showing me that Ellie really does miss Joel. I got that much from her agonized screaming at the end of episode 2, which is still good, but less is more. I didn't need the first scene of the next episode to include a flashback to what just happened with more screaming. Even a week apart, I remember what happened. And I don't think Ellie has that memento disease, so I would assume that she remembers too. Just felt excessive because I already understand what happened and understand how she feels. Beyond that, there were these two moments with the psychologist character, What's-Her-Face, which were really beginning to annoy me. But I hate the psychologist characters in most stories because they tend to fall into one of two roles. First, psychologist character knows psychology, thus making them a master manipulator with no more explanation. Or, as happens here, psychologist character is not a character, just a prop to directly explain to the audience how certain characters are feeling. Yep, Ellie does in fact regret not patching things up with Joel. Any more of the plot we need to review, or can we get on with the story? Honestly, I just watched the episode and I already feel like I've forgotten half of it. While I did praise the show earlier for its reordered structure, my Ellie is a psychopath detector is now starting to get some beep beeps. She's standoffish with Dina for not telling her info on Abby, while Ellie was still in the hospital. She openly lies to the town to try and get her own way. And the psychologist robot is dispensing some not-so-subtle foreshadowing on nature versus nurture. Now, I could excuse all of this as an emotional time following Joel's death, but I did raise the threat level from inert to suspicious. But I can pay the episode 1 compliment, right? I have that power within me. It had a good ending. Good cliffhanger that the WLF have a lot more people and equipment than we thought. Maybe a bit overkill showing a fully loaded APC, a Humvee, and 30 guys, but no, I'm paying a compliment. It was a fine way to end things. Now we reach episode 4, which is a bit of good and a bit of bad. But the episode begins, and holy Moses, no one told me Jeffrey Wright was in this show! That's Felix Leiter! That's Dr. Narcisse! That's my guy. Admittedly, he doesn't get a ton to do in this episode. About the most he gets up to is a very by-the-books interrogation monologue. Villain shares a bit of their past and humble beginnings. They talk about an everyday event or activity in some way alluding to the violence to come. Shots of items that will play a part in the interrogation, and we end with a cut to the prisoner in distress. It gets a little boring when I can watch the entire scene with my eyes closed, you know? That said, Wright, or to use his character's name, Isaac, does a very good job with the scene. Brings a certain presence that elevates the work. Though I don't want to undercut the other character who I'll lovingly name Dick. For no special reason. Isaac's burning the guy's hand with a hot pan as part of the interrogation. He has it all heated up for round 2, but Dick already has his hand held out cause he's not scared of you. Fits with the theme of Isaac's WLF losing to Dick's Seraphites. So despite its cookie-cutter nature, I'll award points for doing things right. The bulk of the rest of the episode is dedicated to Dina and Ellie exploring Seattle with not much worth remembering. They find a tank, and they head to the TV station just as the pair did in-game, where the set designer was looking to impress someone because this scene is graphic. With just one alteration from the game, changing it from midday to evening, this becomes so much more gruesome. Very spooky, very chilling, and the actors' reactions are just the cherry on top. Unfortunately, these reactions are going to have to suffice in absence of actually showing anything, because we don't really want to take any chances here. All I will say to describe it is that there are a few bits that belong inside the human body, now on the outside. Which was fun. Not for any of them, obviously, but certainly for me as the viewer. However, what was decidedly less fun was what came after. Again, following the beats of the game, Ellie and Dina escape a zombo horde in the subway tunnels, where Ellie appears to get infected at one point. They take shelter in a theater where Ellie must confess her immunity, and in turn, Dina confesses that she has the #1 most sexually transmitted disease of all time, pregnancy. Upside, the circumstances of Ellie's immunity are given much more credence in the show. In the game, you could get distracted for 2 seconds and miss the entire exchange between her and Dina. However, in the show, it's played out a lot more, and I can only imagine the tension of someone who would have no idea how this scene would turn out. Good. But then as Dina reveals her pregnancy, the two immediately take a trip to the Bone Zone. It really is just that abrupt.
Ellie. Yeah. I'm pregnant. What?
On my first viewing, I had to roll it back to make sure I didn't miss anything. But no, it's the bite fiasco, I got knocked up, then the two begin making the beast with two backs. Now, it does get corrected or explained after the fact that Dina was worried she'd lost Ellie. Then it turns out Ellie really is immune, so elation and finger gymnastics. But even so, it's tension, romance, with no time for transition. It's exactly what I talked about when I said that tension needs to run its full course instead of being interrupted. Emotions are like the spectrum of color. You have to move through purple if you're gonna go from blue to red. Otherwise, if I can end the episode on a high note, I appreciate that Ellie is the big gay, but has absolutely no clue what the rainbow flag signifies. I like that for a post-apocalyptic narrative. Symbols from our current world which have significance for us, but have to be taken totally out of context for the characters raised in this new age. Funnier still if, like here, these are two elements we can connect, but they can't. I appreciate that tongue-in-cheek moment. Entering the domain of episode 5, we can continue with the good. A fourth super secret issue I had with the game, which I had already sort of alluded to, was the characterization of Dina, or lack thereof. In the game after Seattle Day 1, the other 2/3 of the game, she becomes a non-character. In the show, they seem to want to keep her more in the action, which is good if they want us/me to take her seriously as more than just Ellie's disposable love interest. Otherwise, I'm naming this episode Tor Garradon. For those of you uninitiated, Tor Garradon is a character in Warhammer 40k, a captain in the Imperial Fist Space Marines who is perhaps most recognizable for his unique Power Fist, an actually pretty scary weapon. And I will be naming episode 5 after him because, oh dearie me, this one is heavy-handed. We seem to be zeroing in on a bit of a theme here where I praise a certain element in one episode and then immediately criticize it for being overdone in the next. This time it's the brutality, mostly expressed via set design. Now I can't say it's all bad. I enjoyed the shot of them running away from the spotlight. I loved the infected basement quite a bit, and I would kill to see what this crew could do with a live-action Dead Space adaptation. But that being said, I understand that this is a brutal world. I don't need a third scene in the aftermath of a massacre. I understood that in episode 3. I appreciated it in episode 4. But now it's episode 5 and it's time to move on to the next gag. We already saw the result of people being strung up and gutted in the last episode. I didn't need to see the process being done just so I could, take notes? It's starting to feel a little excessive. Like I can feel the show leaning over my shoulder and going, "Do you get it? Do you see how brutal? Do you understand just how horrible everything is? It's really, really bad out there." Yes, I'm following along just fine, thank you. I didn't need Dina to recount her tragic backstory of the first time she murdered a guy. Yes, everyone is sad and mad, until we're caught in an endless game of one-upsmanship where my backstory is more tragic than your backstory. I had to kill my entire family with my bare hands, and I was only 2 months old! And I don't care. Like I say, bleakness and brutality are good, but they have diminishing returns. Also, as we get this nice close-up shot of Dina here, somebody has to say it, she looks way too good for the post-apocalypse. I've been debating whether or not I even wanted to bring this up, but she's all clean, her hair's been done, and as I discovered on a rewatch, I think she's wearing eyeliner. I don't know. Maybe I've just been spoiled in that way by the Fallout TV show, where Lucy actually looked like she had been through hell. But back on topic, I can't speak about brutality without addressing the big moment of this episode, where Ellie confronts one of the people who helped murder Joel, a woman named Nora. They chase, Nora is cornered in an infected area, and Ellie beats her to death with a pipe. And I must have been approaching the third boss of Metal Gear Solid 3 because I'm feeling the fear. We raise the Ellie is a psychopath threat level from suspicious to worried. Now, the torture and murder of Nora was a watershed moment in the narrative, made all the more difficult by the indifference Ellie shows afterwards. So this was always going to be a rough patch when we hit it. But as anyone who lives near a dirt road can tell you, there are good ways to go over a rough patch, and there are bad ways. And somehow the show manages to do this worse than the game. Now, in both narratives, Nora is kind of begging for her life, talking about what Joel did, the brutality of what he did. In the game, Ellie doesn't acknowledge this and just sticks to the point, won't let herself get distracted. In the show, Nora goes into much more depth about Joel's actions, and Ellie responds, "Yeah, I know what he did, and I don't care."
Don't you know what he did? I don't care.
Now, again, me, not a Last of Us fan. I don't really care much about the integrity of these characters. That being said, doesn't it kind of go against Ellie's whole character to say she's just okay with it? She really wanted to use her immunity to help others, but after that didn't work out, she's just fine with it? I'm genuinely asking here. Naturally, she could just be lying, but even then, why? We saw this done better in the game. Just disregard the question. Move past it if you're uncomfortable. You don't need to answer her at all. Definitely not with an answer that goes against your actual feelings on the issue. So I was feeling a bit confused, but here comes the show again. Don't you see? Oh, don't you see? She's beating Nora with a pipe, just like Abby beat Joel with a golf club. Don't you get it? It's like poetry, it rhymes. Regardless, the episode ends on a very abrupt transition to the beginning of a flashback with Joel. So feel good, the flashbacks have returned, and it only took us until episode 6. Beginning with one flashback that wasn't from the game, What the fuck?! When did Tony Dalton get here? And why didn't any of you tell me? You can't just sneak Lalo Salamanca into a scene and expect me to move on without saying anything. Jesus, it's Jeffrey Wright all over again. Fandom aside, I was immediately a little nervous that Dalton's fame from Better Call Saul might lead to some micro-level stunt casting, trying to use him to fill an otherwise empty scene. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. The scene does have a point to make and a certain degree of relevance to the story. And Dalton does contribute more than just an award-winning mustache. As for the rest of the episode, welcome to 101 KTR Flashbacks, playing all the flashbacks all the time. Yeah, for whatever reason, the showrunners decided to tackle every one of Ellie's flashbacks from the game in one episode. And like everything else, I'm of two minds about this. On the positive side, the flashbacks seem to have been universally considered the best part of the game. So the show had a great outline to build from, and telling them all at once keeps up the momentum. I was even surprised to find myself getting invested in certain points even though I already knew the outcome. Prime example, Joel killing Eugene. I know he's gonna do it because it's already been talked about previously, plus Gene's been bitten. But it's the matter of how and when Joel would do it that created the tension. I know the beginning and the end, but it's the middle that remains unknown and keeps me anxious. Good job, that's something to learn from. However, on the negative side, it can't be overlooked that this episode has very little bearing on the story. The characterization is nice, but it's mainly characterization for Joel, who was killed 4 episodes ago. and now Ellie's supposed to be the protagonist. However, what I'm getting at when I say very little bearing on the story is that there is no reason for this to be episode 6. It could have been episode 5, it could have been episode 2, it could have been the first episode or the last. Slice off that tiny portion of Ellie returning to the theater in Seattle at the very end, or even leaving it in, and you could show this to anyone at any point in the season without confusing or spoiling them. Because it's a cutaway episode. It's only a few great scenes that elevate it above pure filler. But one of those great scenes is not the confrontation between Joel and Ellie. You'll recall that I mentioned in episode 1 that it looked like Ellie was going to confront Joel, but she didn't and just walked right past him while he was sitting on the porch. Well, it turns out she didn't. After the scene ended, she walked back and did talk to him after all. And really, just fuck off, show. This really rubbed me the wrong way, and I realize this may make me sound a bit unreasonable. First I call out that they removed the best scene from the game, and now I'm calling it out again that they put it back in. Sure, but it's the method in which it's done. Showing the scene done one way, moving on with the story, then coming back so many hours later after the fact to give us the rest? It's the storytelling equivalent of saying, actually, this is what happened. I call it comparable to a lie of omission, and it breaks trust with an audience that they're being told the whole story. Beyond that, I got heavy vibes similar to Joel and Ellie's confrontation from part 1, the "you're not my daughter" part. Because that was another big scene which ultimately fell short in the show because it was given too much importance, in the process trampling over all the subtle details. And here it's the same problem all over again. Firstly, they tried to merge the porch talk and Joel's confession into the same scene, and this leads to the two moments kinda tripping over each other. Ellie goes from "you're a selfish monster" to "I want to try and forgive you" over the course of about 30 seconds. Absolutely no time needed to wrestle with her emotions. On the topic of emotions, the second, bigger issue is that the scene is just so melodramatic. He's crying, she's crying, he can't even speak, and if she had hit him just once, we could have entered full-on telenovela territory. A land where the only way to communicate emotions is in the most histrionic way possible. I understand, it's a big moment for both characters. It's just unfortunate I saw the way it was done in-game, and again, less is more. It also speaks to an ongoing problem where the show feels the need to be extra triple sure I understand exactly how a character is feeling in that moment. But even I, the living avatar of autism, can understand how a character is feeling without having them scream, cry, or explain directly outright how they feel. Actually, everyone hold on here for just a moment, because on a suspicion I rewatched episode 3, and in that episode, Ellie says this about the last time she saw Joel.
When I got home, he was on the porch, and I should have talked to him. But I didn't.
But you did though. You actually did go back and talk to him. So what is this scene? Is this supposed to be the way Ellie wishes she would have talked to Joel, even though it's not framed that way at all? Is she just a compulsive liar in every situation? I'm trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to find an explanation, but this feels like a writer who only ever went forward and never looked back, never checked what they already wrote. I don't want to call this incompetent or misleading, but I don't know how else to read this. Maybe you can enlighten me here, but otherwise, we're moving on. Episode 7 begins with the immediate and unwelcome return of the Ellie is a psychopath detector as we rise from worried to imminent. This is still only DEFCON 2, but it's still way higher than we ever should have let it reach. And how did this happen so soon after the plumbing fiasco with Nora? Well, upon returning to base camp, Ellie recounts her misadventures at the hospital to Dina, much like happened in the game, but with two minor changes, both of which for the worse. First, Dina has to ask what happened rather than Ellie confessing it freely. A confession implies guilt and regret. Being asked what happens makes me wonder how much Ellie would have said, if anything, if she wasn't pressed. Also, as Ellie and the show have just been seen withholding information, I'm confident that after that scene ended, Nora received medical attention and is now alive and well. Otherwise, I praised the portrayal of Ellie before, and now I have to slander it. Having Ellie talk about the brutal murder and how easy it was with what I can only describe as a complete stone face, that's not a good look. Not really something that elicits much sympathy for the character. But believe it or not, that is the lesser example of Ellie's psychotic tendencies. Later on, her and ally Jesse are attempting to rendezvous with the final character of their group, Tommy. However, as Ellie gets the opportunity to pursue Abby to where she might be hiding, she immediately breaks from the plan to continue with her mission, even attempting to emotionally manipulate Jesse into joining her. And this right here is what I point to when I say Ellie is an unlikable psychopath. Typically the term psychopath is used for one who kills a lot of people, and yeah, that's certainly a part of it. But when I use the term here, I mean someone who sees themselves as the only real person in the world. Everyone else is a lesser being or even an object, so it does not matter what they say, promise, or do. It is all about them and their needs, which is very much Ellie's behavior. She actively, and at one point explicitly says she does not care about anyone else or their problems.
The community.
Son's the community!
It is about her first, last, and always. She may show temporary grief, but it's entirely artificial. Because the very next day, she's feeling better and ready to continue the journey, damn the expense to her or anyone around her. At one point, Jesse almost calls her out for this, though it wouldn't have fixed anything because it doesn't change Ellie's behavior, and it doesn't even make it better because he walks it back later on in the episode with the classic, "No, you're really a good person deep down. I will take your word for it." Honestly, if I had to summarize my primary issue with The Last of Us Part 2, show mainly, but game too, it would be this. I have no clue if the story wants me to show contempt or sympathy for Ellie and her actions. Because on the one hand, we got clues like the psychologist nature versus nurture talk at the very beginning saying Ellie would always be psychotic, and yeah, she has the actions to back that up. But the validation of everyone around her, from Dina to Jesse to Tommy to even that guy Seth, all make it seem like I should be doing the same. Everybody else is supporting Ellie, why aren't you? And of course there are the scenes of her in emotional turmoil. So I don't know what my intended reaction was supposed to be. Probably, or definitely, it should be the same sort of ambivalence I felt towards Joel's actions at the end of part 1. But here it's not a mix of emotions at the same time. It's first one, and then the other. Moreover, Ellie's actions lack that core of humanity for the emotional side of my brain to identify with, so it remains quiet while the intellectual side dominates the argument. But I've already talked about this, I think I've made my case at this point, let us move on. Still, I want to compliment this episode, briefly, because I think it will neuter any argument that I'm just here to hate on this, and because I think a little praise will help my criticisms really stand out. You see this scene right here, with a big fallen crane in the background? If this is going where I think it's going, that's a good detail, visual foreshadowing, and it makes the wider world/city feel more connected. I also enjoyed the opening that just had Dina and Jesse. Not every scene with the group has to include Ellie. Let's give our secondary characters time to develop. Alright, that's all I got. The other half of my insult sandwich is that the contrivances in this episode, oh goodness gracious. I can feel certain things happening not because they make sense, but because the writers wanted them to happen. Look at this scene right here where Ellie is boating her way to Abby's hideout. She is caught by a tidal wave, somehow gets washed all the way over to Seraphite Island. They abduct Ellie, get ready to kill her, are drawn away by an alarm, so leave Ellie, and she continues on her journey. What? Her boat is just fine after being caught by a tidal wave big enough to throw her into the sea. Which I feel the need to point out because the exact same thing happened in the game, but the boat got wrecked. Alright, fine, whatever. My real issue is that the Seraphites want to kill Ellie, believing her to be part of the WLF, but then they hear the great horn of the script and just leave her. If you want to kill her, then kill her. Slit her throat with that sickle, or hell, you've already got her in a noose, why not just tie it off? It would take you all of 2 seconds. But no, she's the protagonist, so they leave her. Then she leaves the island, and the entire sequence is filler because you could cut it from the show entirely and just save 10 minutes. And in the very next scene, the streak of manufactured moments keeps on going. Ellie confronts 2 friends of Abby's, Mel and Owen, to get Abby's location. Owen goes for a gun, so Ellie shoots him, but in the process gets a collateral hit on Mel. That was a really good split-second reaction. Wasn't even aiming for Mel, yet not only managed to hit her, but hit her in a place that would kill her. Completely by accident, Ellie got a 2-for-1 special. 3-for-1 if you count the baby. Good job, Ellie. I think this is supposed to be the writer's way of absolving Ellie of her actions. She didn't mean to kill Mel, it was an accident, it wasn't her fault. And if that was the intention, it failed, because it is totally her fault. She held them at gunpoint, and fired in reckless conduct with disregard for human life. I am pretty sure even I, the worst legal mind that I know of, could make a case for murder in the 2nd degree. We can even cite lack of remorse after the fact, since her only comment afterwards is frustration that she couldn't get Abby too. And nothing else.
But Abby gets to live.
Yeah. Are you able to make your peace with that?
Guess I'll have to.
But no, Jesse, do tell me how deep down Ellie is a really good person who cares about her friends. Again, I'll just have to take his word for it. And look, I'm gonna be honest with you folks, I'm really running out of steam at this point. Bad characterization was one thing, but now that we're adding in these contrived moments of drama, it's getting really difficult to care. I think I paused this episode about 4 different times to rant to myself. Still, we keep moving forward and... What's that? Wait, that was the finale of the show? There were only 7 episodes. Huh. Looks like I wasn't the only one running out of gas. Yeah, I didn't do any research on the show before I watched it because that's not what I do, and I don't care, but apparently I got my wires crossed. I expected 9 episodes like Season 1, but Season 2 only holds 7. And the reports I've seen floating around that there will be a Season 3 focusing on Abby were entirely true. Maybe because they want to give Abby time on her own to breathe and develop as a character. Maybe because someone at HBO or Naughty Dog think they've got a golden goose on their hands and want to really stretch this out. Or it could always be both. As for myself, the addition of a 3rd entry using Abby's bits from the game is an idea that I like, sort of. I'm already on record as saying I like Abby over Ellie by a wide margin, and barring her needlessly villainous monologue in episode 2, her bits within this season were consistently good. Both of them. That being said, however, we still suffer from the problem that we've already covered a lot of her story. She was a Firefly. Her dad was the doctor that Joel killed. We've already been told major details of her plot, so there's going to be a lot of repetition. And worse than that, we still have the major issue that all of her friends have died before we learn about them. So they can flesh out Nora, Owen, and Mel all they want, but my investment is going to be as dead as all of them. But otherwise, there's nothing left to do about it except wait the 2 to 3 years until Season 3 comes out. Maybe 1 year if they were filming both seasons in tandem, but that still seems like a very tight schedule. Will I watch it? Yeah, probably. It'll be something to watch. Will I talk about it? No. Not unless this video does astonishingly well. But even then, this thing does not have a snowman's chance in hell of being monetized, and I don't hold out hope of the viewing number breaking 3 digits. Ultimately, this was just a homage to my past self, and, say it a third time for luck, still not a fan of this series. I am 100% a rubbernecker for this narrative, and I'm okay with that. And with that in mind, this has already gone on longer than it had any right to do. And look at me, I made it through this whole thing only referencing Warhammer 40k once. Maybe twice. So be proud of me. Or resent me because you're only subscribed for the 40k stuff. I'm sure you'll have plenty of company in the comments section knowing the hot-blooded discourse that surrounds this story. So I'm gonna run for cover before the slurs come out. But if you made it all the way to this very end, genuinely thank you for making it this far. I appreciate you sticking with me like a trooper, and I do hope you enjoyed yourself. However, this does mean that you are now legally, morally, and religiously obligated to watch another one of my videos. I would recommend this one. He found the child, held it in his arms, and even as a baby he could see there was fire in Jagatai's eyes. Then Onig looked up and said, "This is my son now." And little Jagatai grew up to be loved by a few and hated by many.